The night Neka disappeared, the quiet village of Obinpe fell into chaos. At dawn, her lifeless body was discovered on the roadside, and nearby lay her husband, Chike, barely clinging to life with a bite wound on his leg. Before losing consciousness, Chike whispered one word to his twin brother, Obina, Adams. The villagers were horrified. How could the man they trusted with their meals, Adams, the beloved food seller, be connected to such a tragedy? What secrets lay behind his charm, his dog, and his irresistible cooking? As the village sought answers, they uncovered a horrifying truth that would haunt them forever. In a quiet village called Obinpe, there was a man named Adams who sold food in the market. Adams was the only man selling food among the women, and everyone in the village talked about him. His food smelled so good that people couldn't resist. Every day, villagers would rush to the market, forming a long line at Adam's stall. Adam's food was different from anything they had ever tasted. It was rich, flavorful, and always made them feel full and satisfied. But there was something strange about Adams. He would never sell his food to the first customer unless it was a woman. If a man came first, he would wait until a woman arrived before serving anyone. What kind of rule is that? Some men grumbled. Why does he treat us this way? But the women didn't care. They were too busy enjoying his delicious food. Over time, the women of Obinpe became so fond of Adam's food that they stopped cooking at home. They would wake up early, leave their houses, and rush to the market to buy food from Adams. When they returned, they would feed their children and eat, but their husbands were left hungry. One day, a man named Chike came home after a long day of work. "Where is my food?" he asked his wife Neka. Neka looked up from her meal and said, "I bought food from Adams today. There's none left for you." Chike was furious. "Why don't you cook anymore? Why do you spend all our money on his food?" "It's better than what I can cook," Neka replied, "and everyone in the village is buying from him." Chike decided to investigate. Early the next morning, he followed his wife to the market. He saw a long line of women waiting at Adams's stall. The men stood to the side, looking frustrated and helpless. Later, Chike went to talk to his friends. "Have you noticed our wives no longer cook at home? They spend all our money on Adam's food," he said. But his friends laughed at him. "You're just jealous because your wife likes Adam's food more than yours," one man joked. "No," Chike replied firmly. "Something is not right about him. Why won't he sell to a man unless a woman buys first? I think we need to find out what he's hiding." Adams was known for his charming smile, but only when he looked at the women who came to buy his food. To the men, his face would instantly harden into a frown. This strange behavior didn't go unnoticed, but the women didn't mind. They loved his food too much to care. The way the women in the village praised Adam's meals was different from the men. The women couldn't stop talking about the rich flavors, how the food made them feel happy and full, and how Adams treated them with kindness. But the men? They grumbled about how Adams barely looked at them, and how their wives spent more time at his stall than at home cooking for their families. Among all the women, Neka was always the first in line. Every morning, before anyone else, she would be there, waiting eagerly. Adams would smile warmly at her, his eyes lingering a little longer. "Good morning, Neka," he would say with a soft voice, handing her the best portions of his food. One day, everything changed. Adams didn't come to the market. The women couldn't bear it. They gathered in small groups, whispering and asking each other, "Where could Adams be? Why isn't he here today? I hope nothing has happened to him," Neka said, her voice filled with worry. "I've never missed his food this much." The men, on the other hand, were relieved. Maybe he's gone for good, one man said. Good riddance. But even they couldn't deny the mystery of Adams. He had no family, and no one knew where he lived. After a few days, Adams returned to the market. This time, he wasn't alone. By his side was a large dog, sleek and fierce-looking. The dog stayed close to Adams, barking loudly at any man who dared come near the food stall. But when women approached, the dog wagged its tail and nuzzled against them, as if it could sense something only Adams knew. The men of the village grew more suspicious. "Why does the dog act like that?" one of them asked. "It's like Adams trained it to keep us away." Another man added, "And why is he so friendly with the women? There's something not right about him. I'm telling you, we need to find out what's going on." The women, however, ignored the men's concerns. They were just happy Adams was back, and his food tasted as good as ever. But the men couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was happening, and they decided to keep a closer eye on Adams and his mysterious dog. The village elders had been hearing complaints for weeks. The women praised Adams endlessly, marveling at how his food was unmatched. "Even my children love it more than my cooking," one woman said with a laugh, while others nodded in agreement. But the men were a different story. They were fed up. Their wives no longer cooked, and Adam's odd behavior made them uneasy. "Why does he only smile at the women? Why does that dog bark at us like we're enemies?" the men grumbled at their meetings. To resolve the tension, the elders elected two men to confront Adams directly, Chike and his twin brother, Obinna. Known for their bravery and level-headedness, the brothers were tasked with delivering the village's concerns. The next morning, Chike and Obinna arrived at the market just as Adams was setting up his stall. The women were already lining up, chatting happily as the aroma of Adams' cooking filled the air. Adams noticed the twins approaching and immediately frowned. His dog, sitting obediently by his side, perked up its ears. As Chike and Obinna drew closer, Adams' frown deepened, and a strange tension seemed to settle over the market. "Good morning, Adams," Chike said, keeping his tone steady. Adams didn't reply. He crossed his arms and stared at them coldly. Obinna stepped forward. "We are here on behalf of the village elders. They have noticed the division your business is causing in our families." Adams tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Division? I sell food to anyone who wants it. How is that causing division?" Chike took a deep breath. "The women of our village no longer cook at home. They spend all their time and money here. The men are left hungry and angry, and it's tearing families apart. The elders want you to know they are not happy about this." At those words, something shifted in Adam's demeanor. His face darkened, and his dog began to growl low and deep. Chike and Obinna exchanged a glance, their unease growing. "As I said," Adams replied, his voice calm but icy, "I sell food to anyone who wants it. I don't force anyone to come here." The dog's growling grew louder, and its eyes began to glow, a fierce, unnatural red. As Adam's anger seemed to rise, so did the dog's aggression. It barked sharply, baring its teeth at the twins, who instinctively stepped back. "What is wrong with your dog?" Obinna asked, his voice firm but uneasy. Adam smirked. "My dog doesn't like being accused, just as I don't. If the men of this village have problems with their families, perhaps they should look inwards instead of blaming me." Chike's fists clenched, but Obinna placed a hand on his brother's arm, signaling for calm. "We have delivered the elder's message. Take it as you will," Obinna said. The twins turned and walked away, but the dog continued barking until they were out of sight. As they left, Chike muttered, "There is something very wrong with that man and his dog. Did you see its eyes? That was not normal." Obinna nodded. "We need to tell the elders. This is bigger than just food. It's something dark." Back at the market, Adams watched them go, his smirk fading into a cold, emotionless expression. The dog returned to his side, sitting quietly, but keeping its glowing eyes fixed on the path Chike and Obina had taken. Among the women who flocked to Adam's food stall every day, there was a young widow named Chiamaka. She was a quiet woman, still mourning her late husband, but she couldn't resist the delicious food Adam sold. Like the other women, she found herself drawn to his charm and kindness. But Adams treated Chiamaka differently. He always gave her the best portions, smiled warmly at her, and even let her skip the long line. Soon, he began to talk to her more often. "Chiamaka," Adams said one afternoon as she waited for her food, "how would you like to learn how to cook delicious meals like mine?" Her eyes widened with excitement. "Really? You'd teach me?" "Yes," Adams replied with a gentle smile, "but it must be our little secret. We'll meet at night when no one is watching." Chiamaka was thrilled. "Thank you, Adams. I'll do anything to learn." That night, Chiamaka sneaked out of her house, careful not to wake her children. She walked to the place Adams had told her about, a small clearing near the bushes outside the village. Adams was already there, standing with his dog by his side. "I'm here," Chiamaka said nervously. Adams smiled. "Good. Come closer." As she approached, Adams reached into his pocket and took out a small pouch. He sprinkled a strange powder over her, and immediately Chiamaka felt weak. Her legs wobbled, and she collapsed to the ground. "Adams, what's happening?" she whispered as her eyes grew heavy. "Don't worry," Adams said softly. "You'll feel better soon." Chiamaka fell into a deep sleep. Adams carried her to his secret hiding place deep in the forest. There, he laid her on the ground and called out to his dog. The dog trotted over, wagging its tail, and began circling Chiamaka. Then, something strange happened. The dog started having its way with her, and a clear liquid started to drip from the dog, like water, onto Chiamaka's lifeless body. Adams collected the liquid carefully into a jar. "This is the secret," Adams murmured to himself. "This is what makes my food irresistible." Once he was done, Adams carried Chiamaka back to the roadside and left her there. The next morning, villagers found Chiamaka lying lifeless by the roadside. There was no sign of injury, and no one could explain how she had died. "Chiamaka is dead," a woman cried. "How could this happen?" The villagers were shocked and heartbroken. Many had seen how close she was to Adams, but they had no proof to accuse him of anything. "She was always at his stall," one man said. "Could he have something to do with this?" "No," another woman replied. "Adams is kind. Why would he harm her?" But Chike and Obina, the twin brothers sent by the elders, exchanged uneasy glances. They were already suspicious of Adams, and Chiamaka's death only made their doubts grow. "We need to watch him more closely," Chike whispered to his brother. "There's something very wrong about Adams, and this cannot be a coincidence." Life in Obinpe village went on as usual after Chiamaka's mysterious death, though whispers about Adams never really stopped. Despite the unease among some villagers, the women continued to flock to his stall every day. His food was too delicious to resist, and Adam's charm only added to his popularity. Now, Adam's attention shifted to Neka. She had always been among his most loyal customers, and he knew how to draw her in. One afternoon, as Neka stood at the front of the line, Adams leaned closer and spoke softly. "Neka, you've always been my favorite customer," he said, smiling warmly. Neka blushed. "Thank you, Adams. Your food is the best in the village. Everyone knows that." Adams chuckled. "You're kind, but I can make your life even better. What if I told you that I could teach you my secret? You could cook food just as delicious as mine, sell it in the market, and make more money. You'd be independent, Neka. Imagine what that would mean for you." Neka's eyes lit up. "Are you serious? You'd really teach me?" Adams nodded. "But there's a catch. No one must know about this, not even your husband. Meet me tonight in the clearing near the bushes, and I'll show you everything." Neka hesitated. She was excited about the idea of learning Adam's secret and becoming successful in the market, but a thought nagged at her. How can I leave the house at night without Chike knowing? That evening, as Neka prepared dinner for her husband and children, her mind kept drifting back to Adam's offer. The promise of independence and more money was tempting. She imagined herself running her own stall in the market, with customers lining up just as they did for Adams. But there was one problem: Chike. He had grown suspicious of Adams after Chiamaka's death and had warned Neka to be careful. "Stay away from him," Chike had said. "There's something wrong about that man." As Neka stirred the pot of soup, she thought to herself, "I'll find a way to sneak out. Maybe I'll say, 'I'm going to fetch water,' or check on a friend." She brushed off her concerns and smiled to herself. "There's always a way," she whispered. That night, as Chike sat outside the house, talking to his brother Obina, Neka began to plan. Little did she know, her decision would bring her closer to Adam's dark secret and to danger. That day, Neka was unusually sweet to her husband, Chike. In many months, it was the first time she had cooked for the family. She called out to him, "Chike, I prepared your favorite dish. Come and let's eat." Chike raised an eyebrow, surprised but pleased. "What happened?" he teased. "Who visited you in your dreams to start cooking in this house?" Neka laughed nervously, brushing off his question. They sat together, eating and talking like they hadn't in weeks. But Chike couldn't shake a strange feeling. Neka's sudden sweetness made him suspicious, so he decided to stay alert. That night, when Neka thought Chike was asleep, she quietly slipped out of bed and sneaked out of the house. She moved carefully, tiptoeing through the dark. As she reached the quiet road, Adams appeared, waiting for her with his dog by his side. "Neka," he said, his voice low but soothing. Neka smiled excitedly and walked with him towards the bush. "I can't wait to learn your secret," she whispered eagerly. Unbeknownst to her, Chike had been watching. He followed her from a safe distance, his heart pounding with suspicion and fear. As they reached a secluded spot deep in the bush, Adams turned to Neka. "This is where I will show you everything," he said. Before Neka could respond, Adams sprinkled a strange powder over her. She gasped and became weak, falling to the ground. Chike missed his way, and by the time he reached there, he couldn't even make sense of what was happening. He watched in horror as Adam's dog trotted over to Neka's lifeless body and began circling her. Chike's heart raced as he saw the unthinkable. The dog began to have its way with Neka. From a small jar, Adams collected the water that dripped from the dog's actions. He muttered to himself, "This is what makes my food irresistible. The perfect spice." By the time Chike rushed out of the shadows, it was too late. Neka lay lifeless on the ground. "Adams, what have you done to my wife?" Chike shouted, his voice breaking with anger and pain. "You killed my wife." Adams turned to Chike, unfazed. "Who told you to follow us?" he said coldly. "Yes, I use the water from women for my food after my dog has its way with them. That's my secret. What can you do about it?" As Chike lunged at Adams, Adams calmly ordered his dog, "Go." The dog charged at Chike, biting into his leg with ferocity. Chike screamed in pain as the dog held on, its teeth sinking deep into his flesh. By the time Adams was done, Chike was left crawling on the ground, unable to scream or even cry. He collapsed on a nearby farm path, his strength gone. Adams, meanwhile, carried Neka's lifeless body to the roadside where she would be easily found in the morning. As the sun rose, villagers discovered both Neka and Chike lying on the roadside. Neka was dead, her face pale and lifeless. Chike was barely alive, breathing shallowly and unable to speak. Obinna, Chike's twin brother, rushed to his side. Chike whispered one word into his ear, "Adams." Then he fell silent, unable to say more. Obinna took Chike home, trying to nurse him back to health, but Chike's condition worsened. His leg, where the dog had bitten him, began to rot. He couldn't eat or drink, and by the third day, Chike also died. The villagers were terrified. Two mysterious deaths in such a short time, both connected to Adams, filled them with fear. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Adams is behind this," one man said. "But we have no proof," another replied. "What if we're next?" a woman whispered, clutching her child tightly. Obinna, heartbroken by his brother's death, vowed to uncover the truth about Adams. But fear gripped the village. No one dared confront Adams directly, and the women still lined up at his stall, unable to resist his food. Adams continued with his cooking as if nothing had happened. The lines at his stall remained long, and the women still sang his praises. But deep down, Adams was furious. He had vowed to eliminate anyone who doubted him, anyone who dared to interfere with his plans. His next target was Obinna. Adams knew that Obinna was mourning his brother, Chike, and that he had a fiancée, a beautiful woman named Amarachi. She was unlike the other women in the village. She rarely visited Adam's stall and didn't seem to be drawn to his food like the others. One afternoon, Amarachi decided to stop by Adam's stall, more out of curiosity than anything else. She greeted him politely and ordered a small portion of food. Adam smiled at her, his charm as smooth as ever. "Amarachi, you are even more beautiful than I've heard," he said. She blushed slightly, but remained cautious. "Thank you, Adams. I've heard a lot about your food. It's very popular." Adams leaned closer. "It's not just the food, Amarachi. It's the knowledge behind it. Would you like me to teach you my secret? Imagine the joy you would bring to your family if you could cook like me. Meet me tonight in the bush, and I'll show you everything." Amarachi forced a smile. "That's very kind of you, Adams. I'll think about it." But as she left his stall, her face darkened. She hurried to Obinna's house and told him everything. "Adams said that to you?" Obinna asked, his fists clenching with anger. "Yes," Amarachi replied. "I pretended to be interested, but I knew something wasn't right. He wants me to meet him tonight." Obinna took a deep breath, his mind racing. "This is our chance," he said. "Delay him. Stall as long as you can. I'll gather the men and the elders. We'll be ready." The village was already on edge after Chike's death, and many suspected Adams was behind it. Obinna wasted no time. He met with the village elders and explained the situation. They agreed it was time to act. The elders gathered the strongest men in the village. They also sent 2 representatives to visit a powerful spiritualist in a neighboring village. The spiritualist listened carefully as they explained their fears about Adams. He nodded solemnly and said, "Adams is no ordinary man. His power in the spiritual realm is immense. If you confront him unprepared, none of your men will return home alive. You must prepare well, both physically and spiritually." The elders listened in fear, but vowed to do whatever it took. Back in the village, Obinna and the men prepared themselves. They sharpened their weapons, gathered torches, and prayed together. The elders called for a night of fasting and prayer, asking for protection from the forces they were about to face. Meanwhile, Amarachi played her part perfectly. She visited Adams again that evening, pretending to be nervous but interested. "I've decided to come tonight," she told him, "but I may be a little late. I need to make sure no one sees me leave." Adam smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Take your time, Amarachi. I'll wait for you." As darkness fell over the village, Amarachi stayed back, waiting for the signal from Obinna. When the time came, she slowly made her way towards the meeting spot, careful to keep Adams waiting as long as possible. Obinna and the men, along with the two elders, hid nearby, their hearts pounding with anticipation. They had the blessing of the spiritualist and the protection of the rituals they had performed earlier that evening. Adams, standing in the clearing with his dog by his side, looked calm and confident. He had no idea the village men were closing in on him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the village. The spiritualist had spoken clearly. Adams is protected by his dog. The dog is the source of his power. If you can kill it, Adams will become powerless. But beware, this is no ordinary dog. He handed the elders a string of red beads. "Throw this on the dog's neck. It will circle the dog and kill it instantly. But know this, if you miss, the beads will take the life of the person who threw it." The men were filled with fear, but one man, Okoro, stepped forward. He was tall, muscular, and known for his strength. He puffed out his chest and said, "This is nothing. I will do it. Adams will not defeat us." That night, as Adams walked with Amarachi through the bush, he began to feel uneasy. His instincts told him they were not alone. Suddenly, he stopped and grabbed Amarachi's hand tightly. "Who is with you?" he hissed, his voice cold and sharp. "I told you not to tell anyone. Did you betray me?" Amarachi, trembling with fear, stammered, No, Adams. "I didn't tell anyone." Adam's piercing eyes scanned the darkness. He pulled Amarachi closer and started walking faster, his grip on her arm like iron. Just then, the men emerged from their hiding places, surrounding Adams. Obinna and the elders stood among them, their faces grim and determined. Leading the group, Okoro stepped forward, holding the red beads in his hands. He pointed at Adams and said, "You won't succeed this time, Adams. Your reign of terror ends tonight." Adams' eyes glowed, and his dog began growling, its eyes burning red. The tension was thick as Okoro raised the beads, ready to throw them at the dog. But as he tried to lift the beads, they felt impossibly heavy, as if an invisible force was holding them down. Struggling, Okoro shouted, "What is happening?" The beads slipped from his hands, falling to the ground. The dog lunged forward, and Okoro froze, unable to move. Adams laughed mockingly. "You thought you could defeat me? Fools!" His voice boomed, and the dog barked ferociously, its red eyes glowing brighter. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Obinna stepped forward. He looked at the beads lying on the ground, then at the dog and Adams, who stood towering over them. His heart pounded, but he thought of Chike, Neka, and all the villagers who had suffered because of Adams. With a deep breath, Obinna bent down, lifted the beads, and held them firmly in his hands. The weight was immense, but his determination was stronger. "You have brought pain to this village for too long, Adams," Obinna shouted. "This ends now." Summoning all his strength, Obinna flung the beads towards the dog. They spun through the air, glowing brightly, and landed perfectly around the dog's neck. The men, fueled by anger and relief, rushed forward, dragging Adams to his feet. His once commanding presence had faded into powerlessness. He stumbled, his legs weak and trembling, as they marched him toward the village elders. Adams said nothing, his dog's lifeless body left behind as a grim symbol of his lost strength. The elders, who had been waiting anxiously, gathered in the village square under the moonlight. Villagers, too afraid to sleep, watched from a distance, their faces filled with both fear and curiosity. Adams was bound and placed before the elders, his head hanging low. The next morning, the elders convened a full council in the presence of the villagers. The head elder rose, his voice firm and unwavering. Adams, you have caused unimaginable pain to this village. You've torn families apart, spread fear in our homes, and taken innocent lives. For your sins, you are sentenced to life imprisonment in the village prison. You will live the rest of your days paying for the darkness you brought upon us. Adams remained silent, his face emotionless, as he was dragged to the village prison, a small but fortified building where the worst offenders were held. The sound of the iron door slamming shut echoed through the air, signaling the end of his reign of terror. With Adams locked away, the village slowly began to heal. The men, who had lived in constant fear and frustration, breathed a collective sigh of relief. The women, no longer under Adam's sinister influence, returned to cooking for their families. The village elders, sensing the need to restore unity, called a meeting to address the villagers. "Let this be a reminder to us all," one elder said. "Evil thrives where there is division. We must remain united and vigilant, for it is our unity that defeated Adams." Obinna, whose bravery had turned the tide, was hailed as the village's hero. The elders honored him with a public ceremony, presenting him with a staff of courage, a symbol of his strength and leadership. "Without your courage and determination, we would still be living in fear," the head elder said. Obinna, though grateful for the recognition, remained humble. "I did what I had to do," he said quietly. Yet, deep down, the memories of his brother Chike and sister-in-law Neka weighed heavily on his heart. He often visited their graves and silently promising to honor their memory by protecting the village. As days turned into weeks, the village regained its harmony. The market bustled once more, laughter returned to the homes, and the haunting grip of Adam's influence began to fade. But the villagers never forgot the lesson they had learned. Adams remained in his prison cell, isolated from the world he once controlled. Some said they could hear him muttering to himself at night, his words incomprehensible but filled with bitterness. The villagers, however, refused to let his shadow linger over them. From that day forward, the people of Obimpe vowed to stand together against evil, to trust their instincts, and to protect one another. The memory of their unity became a story told to children, a reminder that courage and community could conquer even the darkest forces. Life in Obimpe returned to peace, but the story of Adams, the man who deceived the village, remained etched in their hearts forever. Greed, deception, and misuse of power can destroy communities, but courage, unity, and standing up for what is right will always triumph over evil.